Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, What is the Research Data Alliance and why should I attend the 15th plenary in Melbourne, with speakers Hilary Hanahoe, Benn, Jens Klump, and Frankie Stevens. My name is Stefanie Keters. I work for the Australian Research Data Commons, and I'm the RDA Director of Operations. Just a couple of things about this webinar. The webinar is being recorded. You have joined the webinar in listen-only mode, so you're muted, but please feel free to type in any questions into the questions pane during the talks or afterwards. I shall now turn my webcam off, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Hilary Hanahoe. Hilary is the RDA Secretary General and has been involved with RDA since before its launch in 2013 and has been Secretary General for nearly 2 years, and it's 3 a.m. in the morning for her. So welcome, Hilary.
Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, for that. And yes, it's 3 in the morning, but that's all fine. I'm delighted to join you this morning from Central Europe, Italy to be precise. So my presentation this morning, to show you, is about the Research Data Alliance, and a little bit to give you, set the context for you, what it is and what we do, and then a little on how you should, why you should come and join us in Melbourne, and we'll be there in a few months' time, actually. So let me start at the beginning, because to give you the context of the Research Data Alliance and what it is. So we have a rather, I would like to say, ambitious vision, which is that researchers and innovators can openly share their data across technologies, disciplines and countries to address the grand challenges of society. So the important keywords there are across technologies, across disciplines and across countries. So anybody at any time wishing to, from anywhere, can openly share and reuse, in fact, their data. So how do we do that? Well, our mission is to build the social and technical bridges that enable that open sharing and reuse of data. So that would mean we put equal emphasis on the technical aspects of building these bridges, but also the social, so the community part, and how we get people together, and because by coming together, of course, collaboration is much easier and much more effective. And by the way, the coming together is both virtual and physical in the RDA community. So that's the approach that we, I suppose, we adopt, is that we further research and innovation by identifying and facilitating what we call socio-technical best or good practices and standards for research data, tools, and the infrastructure as well around that. And I'll go into a little bit more about exactly what that means in a more concrete level shortly. So everything that the Research Data Alliance does, and the community, because RDA is one very large community across the globe, is based on these 6 guiding principles. So with the community in the heart and in the center, we have everything that we do is based on openness, on consensus, on balance, harmonization, that it's community driven, and that it's non-profit and technology neutral. And I often get questions about the non-profit aspect, and what we mean there is that whatever is produced under the umbrella of RDA is actually open and available for people to reuse, and there's no technology lock-in at the time of development of a solution. Okay? It doesn't mean that commercial activities cannot be done around it after that, but the idea is that there's no technology lock-in, so that's where that one comes from. So just a few words on the community, because you saw the yellow hexagon in the center there. It's all based on a different number of members in RDA. I'm going to talk to you about the individual ones now. So who are they? Well, the Research Data Alliance is truly international. It's truly covering 137 different countries. We have members from there. And as you can see, at the moment, we're on just over 9,400 members from across the globe. And they come from various different parts of the globe. Obviously, we have a rather heavy Northern Hemispheric presence, but I know that after the plenary in Melbourne, in Australia, we'll have not only an increase in Australian members, but I believe even more around, or all around your area, including Asia as well. We would very much hope. And these members come from, just briefly to show you, mainly academic and research or institutions and organisations, but not only. Of course, that very much reflects this organisation type, very much reflects our focus of the Research and Data Alliance, in thinking that many of our stakeholders are people from who are looking after the infrastructure or the library or the institutional, shall we say, technological aspects. So because if you think of the words around interoperability and the findable and the accessible, the interoperable and the reusable, clearly they're technological solutions that are being sought, or domain specific or domain agnostic. So the type of shall we say, person that's a member in RDA is often from the academia and research area or for government and public services. So we have this community of 9,400 people. So what do they actually do? Well, the very heart, I suppose the technical heart of the Research Data Alliance are the groups and the activities. So the structure with which the community work are through these two mechanisms, the working groups and the interest groups. Working groups are quite focused both in time and in deliverables. So if you see there on the left side of the slide, they develop and implement tools and policy and practices and products, things like code and also standards, by the way, or concrete deliverables that people can then take and implement. Communities or projects or organizations, and they last for about 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer, but that's more or less, and they're very focused on things. And then we have the interest groups, and the interest groups, there are 55 of them at the moment. They focus on a specific, shall we say, data sharing problem or an area of research data management or open science. And what kind of solutions should be identified there. And they last as long as the group is valid and the discussions are ongoing. And often their outputs are for new case statements for new working groups. So an example could be the Agricultural Data Interest Group. They have created the Wheat Data Interoperability Working Group, or the Rice Interoperability, the Agri-Semantics Working Group. So the interest group continues to work, but then working groups with concrete focus and a concrete deliverable are set up. That's one output from an interest group, but others are things like guidelines and best practices, etc. I will show you some examples of them shortly. So just to be clear, because it's a kind of a standards type idea, so I wanted to explain to you the different outputs. You saw them on the bottom on the previous slide, but in the RDA world, we have three types of outputs. The recommendations, which are the equivalent of technical specifications or standards. And in fact, we have a mechanism for which some of the recommendations go through a standards process in Europe. We have 19 recommendations at the moment, 8 of which have been approved as standards in this European mechanism that's there. Just to let you know, when RDA was structured and set up in 2012 and launched in 2013, the structure that was given to RDA was taken very much from the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is a standards body, so the IETF, purposely to follow that process, So RDA made a choice not to be a standards body, but we have the possibility of issuing standards. And I think that's important in this particular time, when there are many challenges around research data management, open science, interoperability, to have the possibility to be sort of ready to go on a standards process. And they're the ones that come from the working groups, by the way. Then we have working groups and interest groups, of course, can also issue supporting outputs. They are important, but not necessarily adaptable bridges, if you like, or those little technical solutions. And we have 13 of them. I'll show you some examples of those and how they have been implemented or adopted as we go through, and I'll explain which are which. And then, of course, there are other outputs, and there may be groups that are interested in, have done reports or surveys or things like that, and those outputs are made available through the groups, yes? So if you remember, I said there were 87 groups. 87 groups is an awfully large number of groups. By the way, we have some groups that have finished up, but their information is still available. So oftentimes it's difficult to find where your area is. I'm just showing this slide now, which is about the how you can kind of identify a little which group might be for you or where it is. So there are two ways of searching using the search advanced search feature. One with a more technological, shall we say, focus, and then one with a more domain focus or domain agnostic focus. So you can use that, and the URL is there, but you can use that to try and identify where your the groups that might be of interest to you are. So I talked about the groups and what they do and what they produce. These groups, by the way, work virtually all year round if they wish to, and of course meet face-to-face during the plenary meetings. Okay, so our plenary meetings, which you'll hear much more about, because we're hoping you'll get a flavour for them and then come and stay with us in Melbourne when we're there in March. But the plenary meetings are obviously a moment for the working and interest group members and the community to come together and work on these, on the activities that they have put out, and also, discuss adoption and things like that and impact, which we try to showcase very much at the plenaries. So I'll try and I'll go through them quickly. There are quite a number of examples. So I think it's important, there are different examples, and so I use a sort of a range of them. So what are these outputs, and how have they been adopted? What is the overall impact of RDA? So first of all, this one is I love this example. It's a sort of an institutional one, but it also has obviously a domain focus. So INRA, which is the French agricultural research agency, so it's a very large research agency across France, took a series, if you see number 1 to 6 down the right side of the slide there, took a series of RDA outputs, recommendations and outputs, so things that were produced both by the groups, the interest groups and the working groups, and they implemented or used them to define their open science policy inside the organisation. Now, their open science policy applies intra-institutional, but also externally to what they fund and to their grantees. So this is a really nice example of how they took the different wheat data, interoperability guidelines, the agri-semantics things, plus some domain, shall we say, agnostic technological solutions to define their open science policy. So an example, if you like, of organizational change and support by the Research Data Alliance. This one is on climate data. So it's also a European institution as it happens. DKRZ are the climate change computing center in Germany and for Germany. And they did a similar thing when they were redefining their climate data model infrastructure. And they took 5 different outputs from the Research Data Alliance and recommendations, and just used them to help define a more open infrastructure when they were remodeling and doing some things around that a couple of years ago. So again, this is an infrastructure, of course, a domain, and climate very important in this day and age, but a nice example as well of taking the outputs and using them for a more infrastructural solution, which would also enable them to be more agile in adding and modifying, shall we say, their infrastructure as the time went forward. This one, a quick example here of, this is actually a very nice partnership agreement. So the Research Data Alliance has some of its groups are in partnership with other international initiatives. This one is the World Data System. And just, it's an example, I think, of how, despite the fact that the Research Data Alliance isn't a policy body, it's very much a bottom-up organisation with the ideas and the work coming from the community, and it's community-driven. However, the output from this interest group was fundamental in the definition of the OECD Global Science Forum and the income streams for data repositories report that was done. So a report that came from an interest group. So this is a really nice example of an interest group supporting output, if you see in the three definitions, and how the basis of the report from that was the creation then of a specific task force under the OECD Global Science Forum, and the creation of a very important policy report to help towards the sustainable research data repositories. So a policy example here. Fortress Seal is the next one. Again, a partnership between the Research Data Alliance and the World Data System. You see a little Australian example, two little Australian examples there finally. So it's not all happening in the northern hemisphere. So this is, of course, the Fortress Seal is a core level certification for data repositories. I won't go into the technicalities of these because I'm sure each of you has a different focus and wish for your involvement in and engagement in the Research Data Alliance. But I think this example shows a lovely example, not just of adoption across the globe, across different countries and continents in the world, but also different domains. So as you see there, we have some examples where it's been implemented and taken on in astronomy or in humanities and social sciences and things like that. So a lovely example. And in the Fortress Seal, actually, it was the fusion of two different standards or two different certification systems. So actually, RDA helped to reduce the number of standards in the world by one in this particular case, which is also very important. And it has enabled the simplification for data repositories around certification. So nice story. 23 things. So the next one is 23 things for research data. The 23 things is a lovely story. I like it very much. And it's very Australian, if you like. Well, its origins of the 23 things are Australian, but has become global ever since. So this one is a wonderful story because it's the output from the Libraries for Research Data interest group, and the sort of first the page that you see on the bottom right is actually the 23 things that was produced by this group in 11 or 12 different languages, and it's a front and back PDF of key resources, shall we say, for well, it was originally focused on librarians, if you like, and how to help them navigate the world of research data. So way back before the Australian Research Data Commons was born and the Australian National Data Service was there, they took the Research Data Things program, the output, so the interest group, and they created a program. And that program was run online and with a combination of different methods, including community-based things. And over 1,500 participants took part in that, which was, if that wasn't successful and wonderful enough, then it has been repurposed and for lots of different domains. So for health and medical, for astronomy, for marine sciences, for humanities. And in fact, for some fair and data and software things. So a wonderful example of how a very important, useful but simple output and interest from an interest group has been taken to facilitate and support not just a huge number of people, but also a domain and international aspect. So it's a very, very nice story indeed. Another global one, this is more around education. I like showing this because we do have data schools, and they're another partnership event with the CODATA, which is the International Science Council's Committee on Data. We have had many schools, but across the world, and you see them if you're able to read and see the little arrows across where they've been. I think we're up to about 10 now. But what is nice about this is that they have produced a research data scientist curricula that can be repurposed and reused. It's online. They're now developing a data steward curriculum. And they have, we estimate in probably quite conservative terms, that over 350,000 euros, I don't know what that equates to in Australian dollars, of volunteer teaching has been invested in this to go across the globe and produce that. And that so far about over 400 students from over 40 countries have participated in these courses. And there's a franchise type mechanism now being developed because there's so much request and it's all volunteer that the people, the trainers and the data schools co-chairs and members of the group are now helping to support a sort of a franchise effort in order to allow these groups to be organised and open to people from all over the world. So it's a very nice educational story from the Research Data Alliance. And the last but not least is another example, which is about engaging researchers with research data management, the cookbook. So another story from the Libraries for Research Data interest group. And we have, by the way, many, many librarians in RDA, and the Libraries for Research Data interest group is one of our largest groups. And the librarians, of course, clearly understand many of the challenges around research data management and are wonderful in creating these resources for the whole community to use. So the latest is this cookbook, which is available at the link, the DOI that you see down the bottom there. And it's a wonderful collection of 24 case studies that demonstrate clearly and practically how to engage with the research community with research data management. So a very useful resource, open to all, and done through a book sprint. And you see the little ladies all running there up the top of on the top right during a book sprint this summer, and now published and available for all to use. So, and that's again from an interest group. So a very nice story. So just to summarize, what's all that impact? Well, RDA has impact across many different areas. So it is an organization that creates, like it or like it not, global data agreements because of its international aspects and things. We do issue standards, as I explained to you, and even if many of the activities that happen down RDA in RDA often propagate into sort of more standards activities, going down specific standards route, the ISOs or the IEEE or other things as well. So we support very much the creation of standards in a world and that very much needs them, I think. Not always, but there are many that should be supported. It does support institutional change. I showed you INRA, but the French Agricultural Research Agency, but it's just one of many. Of course, some of the solutions that emerge from RDA are domain specific, but there are many, many cross, multi and interdisciplinary solutions and activities going on, and that's very, very important, as you know, for interoperability. We very much support the education and training in the research data management and open science field, and of course, as I said, policy, whether we wish not to be a policy body, but we are very much supportive of policy, and many policies do emerge from RDA. And we have a funders forum actually in the Research Data Alliance, and that also helps very much to support the policy and to interact. We have the funders interacting very closely with the community, and of course it offers individual professional career enhancement. So now, very briefly, before my colleagues on the call tell you their experiences with the Research Data Alliance, the plenary meetings. Why should you attend? Well, the Research Data Alliance plenary meetings are unique. We purposely, by the way, move around the globe to offer the opportunity to people and to create, have new members come to our community and to allow people the opportunity to attend a plenary, because we understand very much that it's not easy to fly around the world. Some people don't like to. By the way, we will facilitate as much as possible remote participation, not remote access, but remote participation to the breakout sessions in Melbourne, as we do in all of our plenary meetings. Of course, technology permitting, that can be more or less interactive, but we very much try. I like to show you this because it comes from the guest book, but it's from a person who attended their first plenary just in the end of October, which was our 14th plenary. And I think it's a lovely testimony, and it really sums it up for me. This person said, "Finally, I'm home. Yes, a conference or a plenary which really speaks to me and where all I do feels relevant. Had a great first RDA, met loads of interesting people, and found new points of view too. Look forward to continuing to be a member of this happy family." And then he says it was okay, because that's the finish for wonderful. So obviously my colleagues will tell you much more about the benefits of joining the meeting, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but we would hope very much that you would come to the plenary from the 18th to the 20th of March. There's this wonderful road to the plenary. I don't expect you to read it from here, but it tells you about the different stages in which you can get involved in the plenary, in the Research Data Alliance, and how to prepare and get the most out of the event. Because of course you can turn up on the day, but you would get the most out of this very unique working meeting by engaging with the community in advance. So joining up as a member, which by the way is free of charge as an individual member. We just ask you to agree to our guiding principles, and then you can join all the different working groups and interest groups. There's the RDA in Australia group, which helps to facilitate and gives news and information around it. And then there will be co-located events and all these different activities. There are poster sessions and things that are now open for application. So you should follow the wonderful road of the plenary, and this is interactive, by the way, when you get access to the slide. So I finish my rather long presentation on the Research Data Alliance with what I have adopted in my 2 years as a Secretary General as a mantra for the Research Data Alliance. I fully believe that collaboration, cooperation and co-creation is fundamental, particularly in this world of research data management, open science, e-research and many other keywords like that. That is what the Research Data Alliance is about. And yes, if you want to go fast, you can go alone. But if you want to go far, you need to go together. And the Research Data Alliance is a way in which you, as people who are grappling with challenges or wish to be involved, can get together with international colleagues via the platform, and as well face-to-face in Melbourne, and to collaborate, cooperate and co-create what are fundamental and essential solutions for this difficult moment that we're in. But there are many great activities going on, and I think that the Research Data Alliance is one of the players that contribute to helping close the digital divide and support the big data deluge that we all hear about. So thank you so much for your patience and attention. And I don't know if there are any questions, but I am now finished, and they're my contact details. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting you when I come to Melbourne in March. I was there in July and August this year in Australia, and I'm only dying to get back again. So you have a wonderful country, and I really love what's going on in Australia. You have so many wonderful activities in the area, and I'm hoping that this is an opportunity also for Australia to showcase what is going on and to see what's happening internationally, and to tighten even closer the links that we already have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilary. There was one question whether the slides would be shared with people who registered. Yes, they will be. So we will certainly share them after the event. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the questions pane, but we will move on with our next speaker, Jill Benn. Jill Benn is the University Librarian at the University of Western Australia, and she's also a member of the Research Data Alliance Council, which is responsible for the overall oversight, success, strategy, and sustainable of the Research Data Alliance. So thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. I'm just going to turn my webcam off now and show my screen. Okay, so I've been given 5 minutes just to briefly talk about why you should attend RDA in Melbourne. So as Stephanie said, I'm the University Librarian at UWA and also on the Council of the Research Data Alliance. My RDA journey is relatively new. I've attended 2 plenaries in the past. And RDA was something that I'd known about for a very long time, but from a distance, it seemed like an impenetrable large organisation that was quite technical, and I didn't really necessarily feel like it was a place for librarians. But I've come to discover it's actually not like that at all, and there's just so much happening and so I'm going to share some of those reasons why you should come to RDA now. So the first is that what I'm really struck by when I'm at the RDA plenary meetings is the innovation and best practice that is both shared and created during the plenary meetings. You know, if you have a research data challenge that you're facing, this is the place to find a solution. What's really impressive, I think, is the agility that's shown by the working and interest groups in moving from discussion through to outputs. And I think Hilary really shared some great examples of that. And they're outputs that can be adopted within your institution. So, for example, the core trust seal that has been generated out of RDA, UWA is looking to implement now. So I think there's just such a range of different innovation and best practice that goes on. Obviously, this is the first time that the RDA plenary is being held in Australasia, and so this gives us such a unique opportunity to engage and work with the RDA community, as well as us to showcase what we're doing here in Australia. Obviously, the theme, data for real-world impact, is very relevant in our environment, and I think it's just such a tremendous opportunity to attend. So while in some respects I felt quite intimidated at my first RDA meeting, probably for the reasons that I've already outlined, I didn't necessarily think it was a place for librarians, but my fears were very soon allayed at my first meeting, where I found everyone to be friendly and welcoming. Librarians are not only included, but they're seen as an essential and core component of research data conversations. My first social event at RDA, I sat down at a table for lunch and you know, there were no other librarians on the table, but they were so complimentary about the expertise of librarians in the research data community. So all data related professionals from all over the world are welcomed, all voices are heard, and I think this leads to quite a diversity of ideas and solutions, and that really works with the best practice and innovation that comes from that diversity. There's something for everyone at RDA. There's such an impressive breadth and depth, which is both multidisciplinary and specialised. So to give you some concept of this, and I think this is where sometimes from the outside RDA seems quite complex, and as Hilary said, it is bottom up with many working in interest groups. But you know, to give you an idea of some of the things I attended at the last plenary, I attended sessions on persistent identifiers, best practice in engaging researchers in research data management, discussions on research data management and UN Sustainable Development Goals, management of physical data samples, and the list goes on. You literally can find something for everyone at RDA. In addition, one of the great things about RDA is that whether you're interested in policy and strategy or culture, culture in data management is something that's of interest specifically to me, you'll find it at RDA. And it also provides the detail too. So it's not just the big picture. And so you'll see that in the range of outputs that RDA provides, such as the standards and technical interoperability that Hilary mentioned. Last but not least, RDA is possibly one of the best organised conferences I've ever attended. And this leads to many opportunities, not only to learn from experienced data professionals, but also to provide leadership by becoming involved in working or interest groups, and then generally just having a good time. And it certainly doesn't end with the event. Friendships and networks are established, and the learning keeps on happening between meetings. So in summary, RDA provides an excellent opportunity for connection across geographical and professional borders and boundaries, and I encourage you all to attend and experience RDA in Melbourne in March. I'm very happy to take any questions or for you to email me directly if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. We haven't gotten any questions at this point, but we have a comment that one of the best organized conferences ever coming from a scholarly librarian is high praise. So that's good. Okay, so our next speaker is Jens Klump from CSIRO. Jens, do you want to? Yeah,
yes.
there you go.
Let me
okay,
start.
So Jens, I hope I got that right. Jens is the Geoscience Analytics Team Leader in the Mineral Resources Unit of CSIRO, I hope, and
That's
has been
right.
involved in the RDA for several years and has been co-chairing several RDA working and interest groups. So thank you, Jens.
Okay, thank you. I hope my slides are showing. I want to briefly talk to you about my road to RDA and what you might get out of attending the meeting. I must admit that initially I was skeptical of RDA. I have quite a long involvement in building research data infrastructures, and my experience with other international committees weren't so positive in the way that there was a lot of talk but little action. And so initially I wanted to see how RDA would develop. What did convince me was work done by the Dynamic Data Citation Working Group, which then got me involved in doing things. So my involvement now is quite broad. I'm the chair of the Data Versioning Working Group. I co-chair through other working and interest groups and contribute to other data interest and working groups. And so far I have attended 4 of the plenaries. And P4 in Denver was responding to the outcomes of the Dynamic Data Citation Working Group. This discussion was sparked by work that I did with NCI to implement the recommendations of that working group. And in their recommendation 2, they talked about versioning. And we asked ourselves, what do they mean by version? Version is a term that we use a lot, but we are very vague about. So we started work Leslie Wyburn, Ming Feng Wu, Julia Martin, Jerry Ryder, Robert Downs, and Ari Azmi as a working group, first as a Birds of a Feather meeting following the Denver meeting, and then evolving this into an interest group, and finally into a working group that produced a report on versioning principles and practices and recommendations. And we will present the final report at the plenary meeting in Melbourne, and hopefully it will be adopted by the technical advisory board by then. But anyway, I think this is a nice example of a successful evolution from an idea, from a question that we had, where we needed an answer on, in this case, on what do we mean by versioning and how do we implement it, to developing principles and recommendations in an international context. So this international context is where I see the benefits of working in RDA. That you don't have to reinvent wheels, because there are people you can talk to who are experienced and can give you advice and maybe point you to an already existing solution. And this sharing of knowledge with international colleagues is what I really value. On the other hand, in Australia, we are in a fortunate position that we occupy a sweet spot in terms of size, complexity, and collaboration, compared to other countries where either the community is too small to run big projects, or the community is too big and then fragments into separate camps. And another point that I appreciate a lot is that support by Australian institutions like ARDC allows us to make globally significant contributions. So why should you attend the plenary in Melbourne? It's a great opportunity to meet your international colleagues and expand your network, and to find out what's current in your field of interests. It's an opportunity to learn from international experts, but it's also an opportunity for the international community to learn about your work and to get to know you. And last but not least, it's a place where you can be inspired by keynotes and the serendipitous encounters in poster sessions and functions and working groups and whatever happens in this meeting. And so I can only encourage you to go there, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. So thank you, and if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Thank you very much, Jens. Again, if you would like to type questions into the questions panel, feel free. And we will have some time at the end for you to ask more questions. Our final speaker is Frankie Stevens. Frankie is Arnott's e-research engagement strategist, and Arnott is the Australia's Academic and Research Network, which is an RDA organizational member. So Frankie represents Arnott in the RDA Organizational Assembly. But also Frankie is a member of RDA's Technical Advisory Board, or TAB, which provides technical expertise and advice to the RDA Council and assists in the development, review and promotion of RDA working and interest groups. Thank you, Frankie.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm just trying to figure this all out. I don't know if you can see me, but it's probably not a terrible thing if you can't. So thanks for the introduction. I thought I would talk to you today about two things. So a personal journey that I've had with RDA, and the journey that my organisation has gone through with RDA. And I guess the personal journey started far too long ago in some ways, when I was a cancer research scientist. And I was particularly working on the molecular biology and microscopy side of things. And Jens, do you mind muting? It's just I can hear your keyboard maneuvers. Thank you. I did my PhD in Manchester, and then I moved to Australia. The weather was far better, is one thing, even if it did take, you know, 3 times as long for my antibodies to reach me when I needed them. But I did my postdoc at UQ, and by the time I sort of, you know, neared the end of my postdoc, I have to admit that I was pretty cynical about the whole research thing, just generally. So in some ways, it didn't seem like I was trying to cure cancer. It seemed like we were being pushed to just get published first, you know, get as many publications as possible. And so that whole sort of bigger picture of finding cures for cancer was seemingly lost in that terrible reward system that research has. Now, not going to get into that because that's a different webinar topic for another time for sure. But essentially, I'll just focus on the fact that I was a bit frustrated with this. And the fact that, you know, you'd have numerous groups around the world doing the exact same experiments at the exact same time, all in a bid to sort of get published first. And I always just thought, you know, there must be a better way to do this. You know, wouldn't it be lovely if how about you do this bit, we'll do this bit, you guys can do that bit, and then we all sort of work together and find a cure for cancer much faster and better than before. So perhaps it was a bit naive, but I was, you know, very keen to sort of be involved in making that a reality. And with a bit of a hop, skip and a jump, I pitched myself into the e-research space. E-research, for those of you that might be more familiar with the e-science terminology, is about the application of advanced information and communication technologies to the practice of research. So, and where I was able to position myself was in the infrastructure provision. So being able to provide researchers with infrastructure that enabled the sharing of research data, the collaboration around research data, and that whole sort of a better way of doing things in my view. So you can imagine that when I discovered RDA, I was like, wow, this is the family, you know, this is what everybody's trying to do here. This is awesome. And I was super lucky when I put in a application to become part of the technical advisory board with RDA. I was super lucky to get voted on, and I guess the rest is history from my personal journey. But now I'll just touch on the organizational journey, and I will turn off my webcam here because the slide gets a little bit busy. So from an organisation, so I'm with AARNet. So AARNet is the Australian Academic Research and Education Network, and we provide the network that connects up all the institutions to each other and enables sort of sharing of data through massive networks and connect them to the rest of the world as well. And on top of that network, we provide some services that enable research collaboration and data flows and so on and so forth. So I'm going to talk you through a sort of standard use case for research here and tell you, you know, eventually you'll get to see why AARNet's kind of interested in what the work of RDA is up to. So you could imagine that a researcher needs somewhere to store their data. In this case, you know, we're talking of a cloud environment, for example, and that researcher will capture some metadata aspects around that particular research collection or research data asset. And this is in obviously the unicorn view, the best case view, and that researcher will be able to get their data in and out of that environment. Now that this researcher may also want to interact with researcher B and enable them also to be able to access and contribute to that data asset. And researcher A will want to potentially be in control of who accesses that data. And so, for example, here, researcher C is only able to contribute to the data and cannot actually download any data. You could imagine also that a researcher would want to be able to do that from home and that they'd want to have data ingested directly from instruments into that cloud environment. You could imagine that at an institution, there'd be numerous of these data assets with metadata records scattered around a cloud environment. And sometimes the data will need to go off and you know, go to HPC or some virtual machine somewhere and have some sort of computational activities done on it. And you could imagine that at an institution, somebody will want to know what all that data is about, you know, who's doing what's happening. And in order to, you know, get the most out of that data, we'd perhaps engage the libraries to enrich that data record so that then it could get out there and become open data for others to discover and reuse. So that's a very simplistic way of viewing a researcher and how they interact with their data. But that is essentially something that we do in Arnott, and we call it Cloud Store. And we kind of essentially provide an environment that looks very much like this. Now, where RDA comes into it is that, so there's 80 odd, 88, I think it was, you mentioned, Hilary. I find it difficult to keep track, but there's numerous groups that are involved around this sort of life cycle around data. So, for example, if we were talking about researchers getting access to something, there's a federated identity management interest group that is looking at aspects that involve, that are pertinent to that. And then we may want to have data management plans actually, be the Kickstarter to actually having access to some sort of storage area. And there's a data management plan common standards working group. There's active data management plans interest groups, and another one that's of interest here is the persistent identification of instruments working group. How do we make sure we know what data came off what equipment, and make sure that sort of association is kept forever. And then if we wanted to understand a bit more about data usage and metrics around that, who's doing what with the data, if it is made available for reuse, there's a working group that's figuring out standards around that. There's metadata standards catalog working group. The Libraries for Research Data IG has been really active, and that's one that Hilary touched on today as well. The data citation working group, data versioning working group that Jens is the chair of. And if there is any sort of software source code activity that needs to be done around that data, there's a whole working group around that too. So preservation tools, techniques, I mean, big data, I could just go on and on and on. So I'll just flick them forward there. But that is why Arnott essentially wants to be a part of RDA, because we are involved in everything around that whole sort of system and ecosystem of data. So we go to the plenaries, we understand what it is that people are getting challenged by, we work with people to, hopefully devise solutions, be it, standards, policy, infrastructure, approaches, that sort of thing, to be able to provide solutions and contribute. So as an organizational assembly member, we are involved on a monthly basis with the organizational assembly. And what that means is that as an organization, we can kind of influence and work with RDA on the different directions that it might be taking. We are very grateful, I guess, for the opportunities that being part of the RDA gives us. It gives you an opportunity to showcase yourself internationally, and we're really happy to be able to contribute to RDA in this way as well. So I think I will leave it at that, except to say if you've got questions, I did add my email address at the last minute, actually, because I saw everybody else had done. So you could assume that edu.au is going to work better if you try to contact me. But yeah, you should come along to the RDA 15th plenary in Melbourne. I won't say why, because I think my colleagues did a grand job of that. Yeah, join us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Frankie. We had one question, whether it's possible to get an overview of groups and paths that will be active in Melbourne. So there have been over 60 session requests that have come in over the last little while. The call for sessions is now closed, so we know that we will have that many. And the program will be published around the 22nd of January. So that will tell you which groups will be having sessions. I think we had, from memory, around 30 to 35 groups that will be running sessions in Melbourne. So I hope that answers the question for now. Any other questions from anyone? Please feel free to type them in. We've got another couple of minutes. Yes?
No, just to add, actually, that the plenary pathways that will be, so it's a kind of how would we say, to try and help people orient themselves according to maybe different pathways. How would we explain them? Maybe discipline specific or technology focused. They will be created after the program, isn't that right? Is produced, and we make them available to participants too.
Yes, so the plenary pathways basically try to help people orientate themselves against the plenary program, which can look rather overwhelming. But the idea is, for example, let's say you are interested in the FAIR agenda. So then you would potentially find a set of sessions, one for each breakout or maybe two in a breakout, that you could attend to cover as many as possible that have to do with the FAIR agenda. Or if you're interested in skills and human aspects, you might find a set of sessions within the different time slots that we run the breakout sessions in that would give you a pathway through the plenary that would give you most of the sessions that are relevant to skills and human issues. It's a little bit difficult to explain. I will add them to these. I think I'll add an extra slide with some more information, and I'll put the example from Helsinki on there. Okay, if there are no further questions, maybe I'll have one for all the panelists. And sorry, this is coming a little bit out of left field. So if you had one thing that you would suggest people do at or in preparation for the plenary, what would that be? So yeah, okay, go for it. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to start,
Yep.
Stephanie. So I think for me, one of the key things is really being prepared for what you want to attend during the plenary meeting. As we've talked about, there's lots and lots of different sessions. And one thing I did this time was I sent the program around to the staff that work in the UWA library and asked them for their votes about which sessions they wanted me to attend. And so that was a really good way of getting a variety, being new to RDA, getting a variety of sessions in while I was there.
Thank you very much, Jill. Jens
I can,
or Frankie?
Yep, I can add my two cents worth to this. I guess one of the things that I found really useful with the RDA plenaries is being able to attend sessions that is really pertinent to a challenge that you are currently tackling in your own work or own organisation. So, for example, you know, so Arnott now has a strategic priority around investing in the health and medical sector. And, you know, it's kind of difficult coming from an infrastructure provider perspective to actually know where to start with that. And RDA has been super useful in being able to give us a gateway into that. So RDA has got a number of groups that are looking at health specific projects. And I guess looking at the program and understanding what those were and being able to reach out to those individuals before the plenary, during the plenary, and even after the plenary has been really, really useful and beneficial to us for that. So yeah, whatever your interest is, get in there early and make sure you connect with the people that are driving that in RDA.
Thank you, Frankie. We also had another couple of questions in the questions panel, and these are probably mostly for Hilary. About how many people are you expecting at this plenary? What's the distribution of academics, PhD students, industry, non-government organizations? And the second question, what commercial industry support, if any, does RDA receive? Do vendors pay to play?
Okay, so on the first one, it's very hard to estimate, as Jill pointed out right well. It's the first time we come to Australia, and Australasia, so our participation varies very much depending on where we go. We usually have from 350 to 700, so it can be anything. I think we're looking at around 400, 450 in Australia, so we'll see. I think it's quality, not quantity, and there's usually, so it's not, I mean, my personal measure of success around Australia would not be the number of people that come, but the activities and the engagement on the day, and then afterwards, of course, which is important because we want to ensure that Australia is engaged virtually afterwards and physically at the time. There's usually quite a good range of different stakeholders at our events. Because, as I said, I think when I showed the community membership, you know, and as I think Frankie and my other colleagues illustrated very well, there's something for everybody there, depending on your area of interest. It's so broad, which makes it difficult to navigate, but also open to all. So I would expect quite a different, broad range of different stakeholders coming. On the second question in the commercial, RDA is set up and funded by the governments around the world and is a publicly funded organisation. We have an organisational membership model, and some commercial and private industrial partners are our organisational members. That's their way of engaging. I think it's very, very important for now, for the past, the present and the future of this particular landscape in research data management, open science, etc., that we establish these public-private partnerships. That includes the publishers, but not only. And RDA, based on its guiding principles, is open to them all, and we don't get funded, if you like, directly by them. There's a purpose for that, as in we're looking at publicly funded research data mainly, and we wish this to remain a bottom-up. So we welcome the industrial players together, and there are many different ways in which we are trying to engage with them, but we don't involve them, shall we say, in the pay model, if not for the organisational membership. So I hope that explains a little bit how that works and the way they pay. So they're not funding us directly, if you like, so it's governments and institutions that are funding the main part of the Research Data Alliance across the globe.
Thank you very much, Hilary. I think there are no more questions, and we've actually run out of time. So I'd like to thank all our speakers, and particularly Hilary for getting up so early. And also thank you all for attending this webinar. We hope to see you in Melbourne in March for the RDA Plenary. Thank you very much.